Okay, step out of the bright lights for a second and come into the shadows with me. Welcome to this declassified explainer. Today, we're stepping straight into a gritty 1940s espionage thriller. Just imagine it. The heavy, rhythmic clack of an old mechanical typewriter, the swirling cigarette smoke in these cramped, dimly lit rooms, and men in heavy trench coats dealing in secrets that could literally turn the tide of a global conflict. We are looking way beyond the actual battlefields today, deep into the hidden war of intelligence, espionage, and frankly, one of the most audacious deceptions in human history.
So let's dive right into this. You know, it's often said that in stories of war, the truth is protected by a bodyguard of lies. And honestly, that sets the absolute perfect tone for our cold open here. Picture this. It's a crisp April morning in 1943. A sardine fisherman is just working off the coast of Spain when he spots something bobbing out there in the waves. It turns out to be the corpse of a British soldier floating in the sea. But, and this is a massive but, this wasn't just some tragic casualty of the conflict. The arrival of this body was actually the opening move in a meticulously orchestrated plot that would ultimately change the course of the Second World War.
And this really brilliantly illustrates the massive stakes of the operation we're talking about today. See, the Allies had a huge problem on their hands. In 5 weeks, 100,000 British forces were scheduled to strike the southern shore of Sicily. It was the totally obvious next move after their campaign in Tunisia. The problem? Well, the Nazis knew was the obvious next move. If the Allies landed there, they'd literally be marching into a slaughter. So they had to somehow humiliate Hitler. They had to completely convince the German high command that the real targets were actually Greece, Sardinia, and Corsica, which would force them to divert all those heavy defenses away from Sicily.
To pull off this massive misdirection, they came up with a heist so audacious and honestly so highly implausible, it sounds like pure Hollywood fiction. Step 1, find a corpse. Step 2, dress him up as a Royal Marine officer. Step 3, dump him in the ocean and literally float him into enemy hands. The master plan was to plant these incredibly fake, highly classified documents on the body and just let the tide wash him onto the Spanish shores. Knowing full well there was a heavy fascist network operating there, the British spies calculated they could float their fake secrets directly into the hands of German intelligence.
This, my friends, was Operation Mincemeat. And to this day, it remains the strangest, most successful wartime strategic deception ever attempted. It was spun together by Winston Churchill's team of brilliant spies in this windowless, smoke-filled basement deep beneath Whitehall, and it relied entirely on deploying a secret agent who was completely unique. I mean, he was different from any spy before or since in one absolutely crucial respect. He was already dead.
But before they could even launch this deception, they had to actually find their ghost. Obtaining the quote-unquote perfect body of a recently deceased man in his 30s was absolutely critical. They ended up finding Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh vagrant who had tragically died from eating rat poison. In the sort of morbid reality of this hidden war, the intelligence officers took this forgotten man and repurposed him into their fictitious career. They gave him a post-mortem promotion and an entirely fabricated, highly classified identity.
Now, what is truly fascinating here, and kind of macabre honestly, is the meticulous crafting of this phantom life. They didn't just slap a uniform on a dead body and call it a day. No, they created Captain Acting Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. And to make him feel completely real to the enemy who'd be scrutinizing every single detail, they gave him what they called pocket litter. So you've got an ID card, sure, along with the top secret fake invasion plans, but it's the deeply personal touches that sell it. They gave him a photograph of his completely fictitious girlfriend, Pam, and literally stuffed his pockets with deeply affectionate fake love letters. They engineered an entire human being out of thin air, designed specifically to withstand brutal enemy scrutiny.
But man, the risks were just staggering. The intelligence officers, particularly a guy named Charles Cholmondeley, were constantly poking holes in their own plan, trying to preempt a total failure. I mean, what if the Spanish authorities conducted a proper autopsy and realized the guy didn't actually die of drowning? Or what if the Spanish just returned the briefcase to the British without ever letting the Germans peek at the contents? They were operating almost completely in the dark here, knowing that if the enemy saw through the ruse and was waiting for them on the beaches of Sicily, the slaughter would be unimaginable.
Yet, they proceeded anyway. And they were actually following a very specific playbook. Turns out there were exactly 54 ways to fool an enemy listed in a highly classified 1939 British intelligence document known as the Trout Memo. This single memo served as the absolute blueprint for the whole mincemeat operation.
The memo is wild because it literally compared the deception of an enemy in wartime with the art of fly fishing. It actually reads, The trout fisher casts patiently all day. His main endeavor, VI, to attract fish by something he sends out from his boat, is incessant. Now, this brilliant document was officially issued under the name of Rear Admiral John Godfrey, Britain's Director of Naval Intelligence. But historians are pretty quick to point out that it carried the undeniable, totally distinct hallmarks of having actually been written by Godfrey's assistant, a guy you just might have heard of, Ian Fleming, the future creator of James Bond.
So, with the bait expertly prepared, the drop was executed. The body of our fake Major Martin, packed carefully in dry ice, was transported from Scotland all the way down to the Spanish coast aboard the HMS Seraph. This was a submarine that was used almost exclusively for intelligence and special ops. Under the cover of total darkness, navigating through the shadows of the Mediterranean, they surfaced, read a very brief naval burial service, and slipped the corpse into the chilling waters, sending their bodyguard of lies drifting toward the shore.
And the result? Well, the deception was so incredibly elaborate, using so much fraud, imagination, and seduction, that the spies almost started to believe it themselves. And the crazy part? The trick worked flawlessly. The Spanish recovered the body, German intelligence secretly photographed the documents, and those fake plans made it all the way up the chain to Adolf Hitler's desk. Fully believing the intel, the Nazis sent their troops hurtling completely in the wrong direction toward Greece. So when the Allies finally struck Sicily, they faced just a fraction of the resistance they had initially feared. Thousands of Allied lives were saved.
But here's the thing you gotta remember. Operation Mincemeat wasn't just happening in a vacuum. It was just one shadow in a much larger, sprawling, completely hidden intelligence war. The Allies had realized that to defeat a mechanized empire, standard sea power and troops just weren't gonna cut it. They had to outthink, outspy, and outdeceive the Axis powers on a massive global scale.
This hidden war relied heavily on a really complex Allied intelligence arsenal. It was an intricate web of covert sources. I mean, you had Alan Turing and his legendary team of codebreakers at Bletchley Park intercepting German Enigma communications. You had gadgetry, stuff like high-frequency direction finding and radar, giving the Allies an invisible reach across the oceans. You had special ops, including Ian Fleming's own 30 Assault Unit, acting as these intelligence commandos, raiding enemy headquarters just to grab their tech. And, often ignored but super vital, you had open-source intelligence. We're talking about mining everyday travel guides and newsreels just to understand the physical geography of the battlefields.
The impact of this hidden arsenal absolutely cannot be overstated. Let's look at just one piece of that puzzle, the codebreakers at Bletchley Park. Historians actually estimate that cracking the seemingly unbreakable Enigma system shortened the entire war by 2 whole years. 2 years. That is tens of thousands of lives saved simply by sitting and listening in the dark and unraveling the enemy's deepest secrets.
And the deception expanded massively from that single corpse we talked about in Mincemeat. The Allies were routinely employing strategic misdirection everywhere. They captured German spies and flipped them into double agents. They literally built entirely fictitious radio networks for phantom armies up in Scotland and East Anglia, all to trick the Germans during Operation Fortitude, which was the cover story for the Normandy D-Day landings. They bugged the rooms of high-ranking prisoners of war and even set up a specialist unit called MI9, specifically to debrief Allied escapers filtering back from occupied Europe.
So, the crucial point I want you to take away from all this is simple. Behind the explosive battlefield clashes, behind the roaring tanks and the heavy bombers, there was this quiet, invisible intelligence war going on. It was this incredibly complex web of information, constantly validating and challenging itself through multiple sources, gadgets, spies, and totally fake radio chatter. And this invisible reach right here was a decisive factor in securing the ultimate victory. Which brings us right back to those dimly lit rooms, the typewriters and the leather briefcases. Soldiers unseen pray its heroes unsung. This is our war. The men and women who masterminded Operation Mincemeat, and really the wider intelligence effort as a whole, they weren't fighting with rifles on the front lines. No, they fought with sheer creativity, deep psychology, and an absolute masterful grasp of deception.
So, I want to leave you with one final, kind of provocative thought here. Without the incredibly elaborate fictions crafted by these unsung heroes operating totally in the shadows, how different would the map of the world look today? Seriously, if a Welsh vagrant hadn't washed ashore in Spain carrying the fake love letters of a phantom Royal Marine, how much darker might our history be? It's definitely something to think about the next time you consider the true cost and the hidden legacy of victory. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the shadows, and I'll catch you next time.